Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, ciao, bonjour, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hey, my name is Jedley. Welcome to Reading with Your Kids. We're coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville, located in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts, in the shadow of the Great Blue Hills. We are so very honored and absolutely delighted that you join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. We do that by sharing fun, thoughtful, and thought-provoking conversations with fascinating people who just happen to be writing books for kids of all ages. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show and let them know that they can hear us on the WREB AM/FM 24/7 radio network. And they can find us on the iHeartRadio app, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Audible, Good Pods, Podcast Addict, CastBox, Player FM, Boom Play, wherever you find your favorite shows. 3 wonderful guests for you today. First up is Ell Gonzalez Rose. She's here to celebrate her YA title. It's called Caught in a Bad Fauxmance. A little bit later on in the show, we'll be welcoming Rachel Lynn Solomon. She'll be celebrating her YA title, Past, Present, and Future. And rounding out our show, Kelly Kaminskas will be here to celebrate her debut children's book. It's called Here With You. Hey, it's Storyteller Chip, the storyteller from the United Kingdom, most famous for turning reluctant and resistant readers into recreational readers. Hey, Chip, great to have you back.
Thanks, Jedley. Now, Jedley, question for you. If a grown-up wants to help their kids move from picture books to those big old chapter books, what would you say they need?
Some kind of bridge would be good, like maybe short stories?
Totally agree. You don't teach a kid to walk across your living room floor and then expect them to walk all the way to the park, do you?
No, you drive them to the park a couple of times, and that way they can build up their strength when they get there.
Exactly. And that way they get to see just how amazing the park is, and so before long they want to walk all the way there.
But Chip, don't you think it's really hard to find good short stories for kids?
I did used to think that, but that's why I got together with my good friend Corky Paul. You know him, right? The award-winning illustrator of Winnie the Witch?
I know Winnie the Witch.
Right, well, Corky and I got together to start the Fables and Fairy Tales Book Club. Every month we send to your door a new collection of short stories guaranteed to appeal to all kids from ages 6 to 11.
Guaranteed?
Oh, okay, guaranteed is a strong word, but parents keep messaging us to let us know how everyone in their homes gathers around when these stories arrive. Kindergarten brothers beside their grade 6 sisters, beside their grade 26 parents, and they all enjoy them together. So maybe proven to appeal would be a better way of putting it?
You know, Chip, that sounds amazing. What kind of stories are they?
Oh, all kinds. Jedley, you'll get to discover who the real king of the jungle actually is.
Isn't that the lion?
Oh, no, actually, he's the king of the savannah.
Ah, of course. So who is the real king?
And you'll also get to meet the princess who gave birth to a dog, a cat, and a stick.
A stick? How did she give birth to
And the girl from Indonesia who survived being eaten by a giant.
Eaten by a giant? How in the world?
Oh, and the man from Japan who enjoyed a ride on a time-traveling turtle.
A time-traveling turtle? Chip, you gotta tell me.
And the horse who rode a boy home through the town.
Chip, stop. These stories sound incredible. How do I join the Fables and Fairy Tales Book Club?
Well, you just nip to epictales.co.uk/join and enter the code RWYK during checkout to get 30% off your first 3 months. Your family will then get a new book every month, handwritten letters from the authors and illustrators, and even invites to meet those authors and illustrators for exclusive online chats.
Authors and illustrators like you and Corky?
Absolutely.
So there you go, everyone. Head on over to epictales.co.uk/join to sign up for the Fables and Fairy Tales Book Club. And don't forget to use the code RWYK during checkout, and you'll get 30% off your first 3 months. Chip, that's amazing. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Jedley.
Join us right now from Brooklyn and New York City. Our guest is here today to celebrate her brand new YA title. It's called Caught in a Bad Fauxmance. Please welcome to the show, Ell Gonzalez Rose. Hey, Elle. How are you?
Hello. How are you?
I am delighted to have you on. I have to admit right at the start, I'm not a big romance or fauxmance guy, so I might not be the right one for this conversation. I have a feeling that an old, almost 100-year-old guy was not who you were writing for.
I mean, romance can be for anybody, so you never know. It can be for a lot of different people. It's been interesting seeing my family read it. There are some older guys in my family, and they're having fun reading it, so you never know.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about it. What would I experience if I picked up Caught, or I should say when I pick up Caught in a Bad Fauxmance?
Yeah. So Caught in a Bad Fauxmance, which was my debut YA rom-com, is a fake dating, enemies to lovers, more rivals to lovers, a little less intense. It is a contemporary set in the real world. Romantic comedy. It's about these two rival families who go to the same lake for the holidays in the summer. Year after year, they've always hated each other because of this huge incident that happened when they were kids. And there's this competition called the Winter Games every year, and they get really, really into it. It's like the height of their rivalry. And in this particular winter, the sons of the rival families wind up in this mutually beneficial fake dating scheme, and all of this chaos and romance ensues as the families kind of face off while the boys fall in love with one another along the way.
Well, it seems like a fun premise, and I remember my beautiful wife and I, we had our honeymoon down in Puerto Rico to visit her family, and we would, and we always would go at the same time of year. Every year we'd go down and visit, and we would run into the same people at the hotel that we stayed at. But we never had any enemies. We didn't hate anybody that
you were doing it right. You weren't making any enemies.
Yeah. I'm imagining that there's a lot of people that have that experience of going to the same place, seeing the same people, and absolutely hating each other. And I just have to say, why do you go back?
Yeah, I don't know. It's not actually an experience that I had in my life. Like, my family was not the type to go back to the same place every year, but I found out about it when I went to it was this, I don't want to say a camp, but it was like a lodge that really was big on hosting the same families every year. And they had those little competitions. It was really like a family oriented resort where families of young kids would come, and it was on a lake, and they had all these different cabins you could rent if you wanted to be more of a local. And so that was where I got the idea from, because I was like, I never knew that was a thing. And they talked about how you form friendships and some rivalries as you come back over the years. And I was like, my family would have probably been very competitive about all of this if we were here. We certainly would have made a lot of enemies. So it is a real thing. And I was thinking about it. It was more on the outside peeking in, I was like, wouldn't that be interesting to explore what that is like? Because I never did it myself.
So is that where the inspiration and the spark for this book came from? You were kind of there and experiencing it and immersed in this culture, and you thought, what if?
Yeah. Pretty much. I remember I went there, I was with my family, and I was like, it was kind of like experiencing something that was just so foreign and so fun. Because I was like, wow, wouldn't that have been interesting? And I was doing the what if game of what would have happened if my life had been one of these families and I had come here year after year. And I knew at that point that I really wanted to attempt to pursue traditional publishing. I had been writing my entire life. So I knew I wanted to write a book. I just didn't know which would be the book yet that I wanted to take a very serious crack at it. And it wasn't until I took that trip and I kind of had all these other little inklings of ideas, kind of had the idea for rivals who have to fake date each other. Cause, tropes are kind of king in YA and in romance, especially these days. So at the time I was like, well, those are my two favorites, and it seems like a perfect scenario for tension and banter and fun. And then it just perfectly combined with this lakeside setting that I had experienced. So it all really fell together, like all of these different threads that really came together and solidified on that trip to that lake.
Wow. This seems like a real fun book
Thank you.
for kids to read. We always encourage families to continue to read with their kids through the middle grade years and into the YA years. My daughter and I, we didn't read any rom-coms. She just says it. We would co-read lots of books together, a lot of Truman Capote, and, which was definitely not wrong. At least what we read wasn't rom-com. But I think it's a real fun way to stay connected with kids and to have easy conversations, easy regular conversations with your teens and young adults. And sometimes for a lot of families, those conversations can be very difficult because kids are needing to break away. Parents are like having a hard time letting go. And it's a time of life that's kind of rife for strife, for difficulties. And this seems like it would just be a fun book to sit down and read and co-read together.
Yeah, I would like to think so. And, it very much is written for teenagers. Like, it explores a lot of topics that I always say, like, all of my YA works are letters to myself when I was a teenager and things I wish I could have known. So this one, in a lot of ways, deals with grief, as one of the families is dealing with the loss of their mother, which is something that I dealt with later in life that I wish I could have known more about when I was a teen. Also deals with the main character who is a freshman in college, kind of dealing with what it's like to be in college and what that means in a family where, like, not everyone went away to college and no one certainly was studying the arts, which was something that I dealt with a lot of pressure with when I was his age. And there's one character who doesn't think that he wants to go to college and is trying to figure that out. So it's, I think, a good book if you're trying to figure out, like, the tougher conversations that maybe kids aren't ready to have yet about their future. And I know that these were conversations I was afraid to have when I was a teenager. And that's why I was like, let me wait, redacted amount of years after I'm a teenager to write a book about it and kind of say everything that I wish that I had the ability to say when I was that actual age, when I was, 17, 18.
Yeah. I had those conversations about going into the arts a little bit later. I came out of college and went into social work, and then at the ripe old age of 28, announced to the world that I was going to become a professional clown. And that was a tad bit difficult for my working class family to accept. And but thankfully, they did come around, and it was the way I made my living for 35 years, and really wonderful. I'm imagining when you were having those conversations, you heard a lot of, but you have to have a backup plan. What are you going to do in case?
It's interesting because I actually had the reverse experience, which is very odd, where I was the child of a repressed artist. My dad was one of those kids who, like, was always creative. Like, he loved poetry. Like, up until he passed away, he was writing poetry, like, his entire life. I have one of his poems that he wrote about me when I was born framed, like, above my desk in my office. He just loved literature and the arts and English and he just loved to read. He would read, like, hundreds of books a year. And for him, he came from a immigrant family. He was the only child that they were able to send to college. So he knew he had to get a job, especially at the time. He was born in 44. He knew that he needed to get a job that was going to pay the bills. That was his only option. My mother is in a very similar situation, except that she was not as creative. But my dad in particular was always very, very drawn to the arts. And I think had that artistic spirit in him, and he was a doctor for most of his life. And I think I have the only parents in the world that when I think I was like 14, I said, oh, what if I want to be a doctor? What if I want to be a pediatrician? And my dad was like, absolutely not. You will not be a doctor. Which I was like, okay, that doesn't usually happen. But he was really encouraging me. He's like, I don't think that you would like being a doctor. It's what I did, and I know you're my child. I don't think that you would like this. I encourage you to go and see what it is that you want to do. And it wasn't until I went away to college, I kind of was, messing around, doing a bunch of different things. I eventually declared a computer science major because I felt this pressure, like, kind of put upon myself, not necessarily put upon by my family, but my family, my parents in particular, kind of studied what they knew they'd be good at, and that would kind of be a guaranteed return. They both were in medicine. And I felt like I should really be doing the same because my parents didn't get options. Why do I get options? You know, I should make sure that they are getting a return on their investment and I get a good job that will pay well and I'll be able to survive on my own. And it wasn't until I kind of realized how much I hated computer science that my dad pulled me aside and he was like, I really don't think that this is for you. I've never thought it was for you. And you love to write. And at the time, my school didn't have a creative writing program when I got there, but they had just started one my sophomore year, I think. You had to apply to get in. And he really, really encouraged me to apply for this creative writing program and try it out, see what happens, which I did. And I got in and I studied creative writing, graduated with a degree in creative writing. And it all worked out in the end. You know, I ended up becoming a writer, both in my day job and, you know, I guess my side job as an author. So it all panned out really because of them, because they gave me the courage to do it and kind of the permission to go forward. But that, of course, comes with its own drawbacks because dealing with a lot of pressure of like being in the arts is a very unstable industry. And there was a lot of time where I didn't know if it was what I wanted. I didn't know if this was worth it. It was like, maybe I should have just gone into something more stable. You know, did my parents bust their asses to get me to this great college, to give me all these opportunities for me to go and pick the wrong artistic career? Like, would it have been better if I had just gotten a stable career, stayed in computer science? Maybe I don't actually want to be a writer. I do, thankfully. It all worked out. But in the immediate aftermath of college, that was not clear. And especially during college, that was not clear. So it was still a lot of mental turmoil in a very different way, though.
What a cool dad you had.
Yes, thank you.
No, I think it's difficult because, you know, I think, you know, a lot of that whole, what are you going to do? What are you going to have her as a backup plan? It comes from a good place. It comes from, hey, I know it's hard out there and you got to pay your bills. And, do you like to eat? Well, then you might want to make some money. So I get that, but it's also, I think your dad had the wisdom to know that, yeah, you got to eat, but it's also important to find something that you love and that's going to bring you joy.
Exactly. And I think my parents knew me well enough at that point to know, like, it was very much like the type of kid, like the minute I was able to work, I got a job and I was like, I'm saving money. I don't need an allowance. I'm going to go spend my own money. I want to have my own money, have my own stuff. And they were like, she's a very independent child. She'll be okay no matter what she does, but at least we can try to nudge her in the right direction, which I appreciate to this day. I'm eternally grateful that they pushed me in the direction I needed to go.
That's really wonderful. Now, had you always envisioned yourself, once you decided, yes, I'm going to be a writer, that you'd be writing for this audience?
Definitely not. I kind of bounced around when I was a kid and I wrote like everything, like fantasy, thriller, mystery, romance. I wrote a little bit of everything because I just love to write. I always say, like, I don't have a favorite genre necessarily to write, especially now that I've been doing it somewhat professionally, I'll say professionally for a couple of years now. I just love to write. And in college, especially when you're studying creative writing, there can sometimes be this attitude of like, what is kind of writing that is worthy of merit and worthwhile writing, I guess. And that's usually sometimes like literary fiction or things like short stories, because that's, I guess, just easier to study in class. So romantic comedy was nowhere on my radar during college because it felt like that was not a genre that was necessarily valued by the people who were observing and grading my work. So I didn't really give myself permission to even think about that until I took a very long break after I graduated from college. I was very burnt out from writing. I had tried to do more like comedic pieces, and I feel like I wasn't quite getting the response that I wanted from that. It was like, no, what's the point of all this stuff? And it's like, well, the point's to make you laugh. That can be the point. And I took a break for about 3 years just to read and fall in love with reading again, which was always my first love before I started writing. And it wasn't until I started reading like the adult romantic comedies, I was like, oh, this is a thriving industry that you can write about. And then I eventually discovered young adult romantic comedies, and I was like, oh, this is exactly what I want to write. This is fun. This is fun to read. And this is kind of like what I felt like was my bread and butter, and especially what made me very happy, which is what I think I needed to write when I was trying to get back into the swing of writing for myself again, instead of writing for a grade, writing for an exam, writing for a final, was to write something that made me purely happy. And I knew that writing something funny and romantic was going to be exactly that.
Well, that's really cool. Isn't it strange that for some reason a lot of people look down their nose at anything that's popular?
Yeah, I know. I was like, it's just like they're just jumping on the train. They're just like, nah, don't like it.
Yeah.
I'm like, I like everything.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't care. I don't yuck anyone's yum.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you a romantic yourself?
I don't know. It's hard to say. It's funny you say that because at my most recent book launch, my mom, who was there, like, went on this whole long rant. She's like, I'm so surprised you're a romance reader because you're so not a romantic person. And I was like, oh, she's just airing my hair. I actually got engaged at that book launch too, which is like, she ate her words. I was like, well, I was like, look at that. But, I guess not, according to my mother, objectively. I think I've always loved romance, like as a genre. I wrote it as a kid. I love it, like just reading it and consuming it. It's just so much fun. Mm-hmm. So I guess in that sense, yes. But if you're going to listen to my mother, apparently not.
Well, congratulations on your engagement.
Thank you.
That's really wonderful. Wow. I'm curious. Like I said earlier, my daughter and I read together. But again, it wasn't romance. But if there's a dad that's listening to this, mm-hmm. or a mom and that's listening to who is into romance, and maybe the dad's like, that's girl, that's stuff that your mom reads. And what would you say to that dad to encourage him to pick up, well, 2 copies because they're going to co-read it, yes. Pick up copies of Caught in a Bad Fauxmance to co-read with his daughter or even with his son?
Yeah, I think it's to not be afraid of the fun. I think that sometimes we think of these like romantic comedies and romance as things that are like, oh, they're just light, fluffy reads. And it's like, well, we need that in our lives. We need joy. We need like just happiness and just fun feelings. And also there's, I think, a misconception that romantic comedies can't have depth and that they can't deal with very real issues. And I think a lot of them do in very, very intriguing ways. Like I know Fauxmance, like I said earlier, deals with a lot of different kinds of complex topics like grief and studying the arts and what you want to do with your future. But there are so many like different topics that are explored in romantic comedies for both teens and for adults. And romance just is a really great place to do it because it's the strengthening of the emotional bond between the characters. It allows them to really get vulnerable. It can really teach you a lot. And I think that even if you're not a romance reader, I think it can just be, it's a very commercial, like kind of writing style. Like I don't think you need to have read romance to get into it. Mm-hmm. And going to what you said, like my future father-in-law, who actually is also a professional clown, was just, I know, it was when you said that, I was like, oh my God. He actually just texted me the other day that he had just finished reading my second book. And he said, you have such a way of hooking me with your writing. He's not in particular a romance reader. And he said, you have such a way of hooking me with your writing. And he said, the only other person who can do that for me is Stephen King. So you'd never think like young adult romantic comedy at a lake and Stephen King in the same sentence. And he is my future father-in-law, so he's probably being extra nice to me. But it just kind of shows that, you don't have to be a romance reader to get something out of a romance book. It's just a fun genre. It's a fun thing to explore.
One of the things that I was guilty of with my son when he was a kid, he devoured graphic novels and mm-hmm. anime. And he's in his 30s right now, and I didn't appreciate. I supported him. I bought him graphic novels. We took him to the stores, but every once in a while I would go into his room and say, could you please read a book without a picture in it? Just one mm-hmm. a month. And I wasn't able to appreciate the fact that he was reading and that there was depth to those graphic novels that he was reading. And I think you're saying the same thing in romantic, in romance and rom-coms. There are stories. There are emotions. It's a great way to explore different emotions, especially emotions that young people are going through.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And I think too, like there can be a lot of value in particular, I write queer stories with characters that share my background. I'm mixed Puerto Rican, and I always have, Puerto Rican characters leading my stories. And a big part of that is also like having my culture represented in all of my books. And that was something that would have been super impactful to me as a kid. And I think can be very valuable for readers of any age to see either their culture or their queerness represented in a way that feels authentic to them and feels like kind of like a warm hug. I always say that can also be super important and very, very helpful for people to see at all ages, across all genres, just to see themselves represented in some form of media.
Yeah. You mentioned that you're part Puerto Rican, as my kids are. they always used to joke, what am I? Am I Irish? Am I Puerto Rican? What's the name to put those together? Mm-hmm. And I couldn't think of one. And then we had a guest on the podcast, Vicki Weber, who shares, and she said, my mom always used to call me a Puerto Rican.
I personally have always said my dad was Jewish, so we said I was Jew-Rican. So that was my particular moniker.
I love it. Hey, where can we go to find out more about Caught in a Bad Fauxmance and all of the writing that came from your imagination?
Yeah, so you can purchase Caught in a Bad Fauxmance wherever you get your books, or you can check out more about it at my website, which is ellgonzalezrose.com. For more on my other books, you can still go to my website, or you can check out my Instagram, which is Ell Gonzalez Rose. My name is spelled E-L-L-E, and it's Gonzalez with 2 Z's, no S's in this name. I am also on X as well at E Gonzalez Rose.
Awesome. And we always love supporting our independent and local bookshops, so you can always go there, ask them if they have it, and if they don't, just say, please, can you get it for me? And it'll be there in a day or two.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We've had a great time speaking to the author of Caught in a Bad Fauxmance. Great new title from our guest, Ell Gonzalez Rose. Hey, Ell, thanks so much for being with us.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Are you looking for a new book to add to your family library? Well, I have great news for you. Lynn Podrad, the award-winning author of Listen to Me, How My Down Syndrome Brother Saved My Life, has once again shared with us her family and a brand new book. It's called My Sister Wants an Elephant. Randy's sister wants a what? And his mom isn't flat out saying no? My Sister Wants an Elephant is a true story of 2 siblings who team up together to convince their mother to let them own a couple of wild animals as pets, and a mom who just might be persuaded. This book is full of humor and fun. It's a good lesson in not giving up on your dreams, no matter how truly wild they may be. Get your copy today. My Sister Wants an Elephant by Lynn Podrad. Hey, my friends, I would like to tell you about a website you absolutely should check out. It's owningthedash.com. It is the website of Anthony Deloney. Anthony was on the show not too long ago, and he is all about helping parents help their kids become financially literate. The phrase owning the dash was originally taken from the world of fitness. The owning the dash philosophy means recognizing and taking ownership of opportunities in life by making smart decisions now that will help ensure a happy and healthy future. That's what Anthony and his books are all about, giving parents the tools they need to help their kids become wiser and more financially literate. Check out the website today. Do yourself a favor, owningthedash.com. We also hope you'll check out Astronaut, Aquanaut, How Space Science and Sea Science Interact, written by our Dean of all things STEM and STEAM, Jennifer Swanson. Journey from the deepest trenches in the ocean to the farthest humans have ventured into space, and learn what it takes to explore these extremes. You might just be surprised by how similar the domains of astronauts and aquanauts really are. This is a fantastic book. It is a Reading with Your Kids certified great read, and it's going to inspire your kids to check out the STEM fields. Astronaut, Aquanaut, How Space Science and Sea Science Interact, written by Jennifer Swanson. Join us right now from the Netherlands. Our guest is here today to celebrate her YA title. It is called Past, Present, Future. Please welcome to the show, Rachel Lynn Solomon. Hey, Rachel, how are you?
Hey, I'm so good. Thank you for having me.
Delighted to have you on. Rachel was just telling us that just last week, she was not too far away from our Reedville studios at Brookline Booksmith, a wonderful little bookstore just outside of downtown Boston.
Yes, I just got back from my U.S. tour for this book, and it was tons of fun. Actually, the Boston stop was definitely one of my favorites. I love that area. I actually, I got married in Boston, so it will always have a big piece of my heart. So it was the first time I'd been back since getting married.
Oh, wonderful. Well, congratulations, and I'm glad you have that connection. I got married in Boston, too.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a weird story because we eloped in Boston. So when we say that we eloped, people are like, oh, where'd you go? You know, Hawaii or some other tropical place. And we're like, Well, we had a trip planned to Boston, so we just decided to do it there. But you know what? It was wonderful.
Well, since we're talking a little bit about romance here on the show, I'm curious. I personally, one of the things that I did with my beautiful wife before she became my beautiful wife was I let her know that I didn't want the wedding planning to get out of hand. That we were getting married in the cathedral and we wanted to have a little celebration, but all of a sudden it was 300 guests on the guest list. And I told her very often, I said, listen, if it gets crazy, if our parents are making us crazy, I just want us to go off and elope and take care of it. This should be a celebration. It shouldn't be crazy.
Oh, for sure. And oh my gosh, 300 people. That is wild.
Well, back then that was a little wedding. So tell us about Past, Present, and Future, please.
For sure. So Past, Present, Future is the sequel to a book of mine that came out in 2020. And that book one is called Today, Tonight, Tomorrow. And it is a romantic comedy following rival overachievers, so academic rivals who realize over the course of 24 hours on the last day of senior year that they may actually be in love with each other. And as with any good rivals to lovers story, there is a lot of, forced proximity, banter, what I hope is a lot of good tension leading up to the payoff. And because that book takes place just in one day, after I heard from a lot of readers, and it took me a while to figure out what the right story would be, but eventually landed on coming up with a sequel, which is Past, Present, Future, that just came out, and it follows the two main characters as they navigate a long-distance relationship their freshman year of college.
So let's talk about these lovers, these romantic partners.
Sure. So they are Rowan and Neil, and they were at odds all throughout high school. They, competed in just about everything possible, from student council to just silly gym class contests to just always trying to one-up each other. And Rowan is an aspiring romance author. So the books kind of have a bit of a meta element to them because they are romance novels. And Neil, who is now her boyfriend, he is, I really wanted to make him as awkward and nerdy as possible because I love a beta male and I do not think they get nearly enough attention in romance. So he is a short, redheaded, freckled, lovable nerd who he has a passion for linguistics, and his dream is to one day become someone who compiles dictionaries. And he loves untranslatable words in other languages. And one of my favorites that actually probably some of the listeners will be familiar with because I think it's made its way into English is the word tsundoku. It's a Japanese word that means acquiring more books than you could ever read. I think everyone knows what that's like.
Wow. Is there a person in your life that Neil is kind of based on?
I tend to give my characters a lot of traits from myself. It's always so weird talking about him because I'm like, he's a short redhead with glasses, and then I look at myself and I'm like, oh. But I think that redheaded guys tend to not get as much attention in fiction or just in pop culture. They've kind of gotten the dull end of the stick for quite some time. But he definitely has a lot of like my, awkwardness and nerdiness from high school for sure.
One of the things we like to talk about here on the podcast is what kind of conversations can families have as they're reading a book together, co-reading a book together. We encourage families to continue to read together as kids get older, obviously when they become independent readers through middle school, high school. And I think it would be neat for families to, read a young adult book like Past, Present, and Future. What do you think the kind of conversations might be if families reading this simultaneously and talking about it over the dinner table?
I love that question because I really try with my young adult books. So I write books for adults and also for teens. And in my YA, I feel like there's a unique opportunity to show a healthy relationship on the page as a model for teen readers without being didactic. And that's what I'm always trying to do, is show what a, healthy, consensual, full of communication relationship looks like between these two characters who are hopefully really relatable and lovable and fun to follow. And you don't realize that they're actually modeling something that, everyone absolutely deserves to have. So I think as these two characters are navigating this relationship, and especially living apart from each other for the first time, I hope that it sparks some conversations about, what conversations can you have with your partner, how to be vulnerable with your partner, how to talk about difficult things around intimacy and physical intimacy. That's definitely a huge part of the book. And it's not something that I've seen a lot of in YA. I mean, this is definitely more on the mature end of the spectrum. The characters are 19 in the book. And I feel like it's something I would have really wanted to read as a teen. I would love to have seen these two people figuring out, okay, these are the difficult parts in our relationship. These are the obstacles that we're coming up against. How can we come together and get through them? I could not resolve conflict at all when when I was in relationship as a teenager. And I think that in the romance world, there's a bit of a, people kind of look down on the miscommunication trope. I don't know if you've heard much about this. I know you're probably more in the children's world, but I feel like every single relationship that teenagers have, I mean, not every single, but the majority of relationships that teenagers have that end in a breakup are often because of miscommunication, because we just don't really know how to talk about things yet. So the idea that this could help someone figure that out or just be a conversation piece when it comes to that is, I really love that.
Yeah. Tell me, it's been an awfully long time since I was a freshman in college and having relationships. How do you think relationships have, and especially young relationships, have changed over the decades?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I was also, college for me was, 15 years ago, so longer than I would like to think. Or I guess I was a freshman, 15 years ago. So I know that it's definitely different now than it was when I was there. And one thing I'm always trying to navigate actually as an author is writing something that feels authentic to the current moment without feeling really dated in terms of slang, and without feeling like I'm trying too hard to sound like teenagers today. You kind of want to hit the sweet spot of, not necessarily being timeless, because I think that's just an impossible feat, but you want to have enough universality that someone could pick it up now, they could pick it up a few years from now, they wouldn't toss it away thinking oh God, this is embarrassing that she's trying this hard to capture the voice that is not relevant anymore. Mm-hmm. I really think the biggest thing, and this is just so obvious, is just the role of technology and social media. I remember in freshman year, for most of freshman year, I did not have a smartphone. It was just changing. I think I got one maybe in sophomore year of high school. But just the amount of access and communication that you have with other people, and how that makes things easier, of course, but also just the fact that you can literally know what someone is doing any second of the day would, I think for people in a long distance relationship, that might cause a lot of stress, because you would, maybe you have a call scheduled with someone, or a call scheduled with your boyfriend, and then you see them on Instagram out hanging out with their friends, and you're sitting alone in your dorm room and wondering, why am I not doing that? Or are they having more fun without me?
Yeah. I hadn't thought of that, but that must, I love technology. I love the fact that, because of the magic of technology, you and I were on different sides of an ocean, and we can see each other and we can talk to each other in real time. But I know that if I had this access to this technology when I was a kid, it wouldn't have been pretty. I would have done some really dumb things.
Oh, for sure. And they, I feel like there are ways that they use the technology to help their relationship, for sure, and then ways that it kind of hinders it. Ways that it brings them closer together and ways that it does the opposite. And I also think that teens right now and teens that are the same age as the characters are so much more open about, just about everything. When it comes to identity, when it comes to sexuality, when it comes to mental health, which is a really big part of the book. So I think that talking to, friends and loved ones about therapy, about medication, that is not something I could ever see myself having done in freshman year of college, nor could I see my, the friends that I had at the time talking about it. I'm sure people did, but I don't think it was as common as it is now. So I think teens are just, there's, at least from an outsider's perspective, I think there's a lot more, comfort in their skin.
Yeah.
Which is really lovely.
Yeah, that is a wonderful change that we are talking and more open about mental health. I know when I was in my early 20s, I had 3 friends die, very close together, and I went to see a counselor, and even the counselor said, "Your friends died. You're supposed to be sad. Suck it up. Get out there." You don't.
Oh my gosh.
Things are different 100 years ago. So.
Gosh, yeah, I'm sorry. And that's, you would never see that. Well, first of all, I feel like that's, at this point, that's almost like a caricature of a bad therapist, right?
Mm-hmm.
It definitely has come a long way.
Yeah. Why do you love writing for this audience, and especially writing romance and rom-coms for this audience?
Oh yeah, I really, it's such a passion of mine. And it's funny because I started out writing YA and then began publishing adult. And as soon as my adult books started coming out, people were like, "Oh, are you going to stop writing for teens now?" And I was like, "No, I love it too much." And even though my books are on the older side, I think there's a lot of crossover. To me, nothing really compares to the emotions that you experience at that age. You experience every high is the highest high and every low is the lowest low. Everything is just so big and you feel so much. And I think there's just a sense of optimism and openness that, sometimes our cynical adult selves might be a bit more removed from. And I think that there's just something so special and thrilling about first love. And that's often what I'm writing about when I write YA. Even though, sex positivity is something that's really important to me as an author. And I think, just about all my books do have sex scenes in them, even my YA. That is something that is really I think that first love is really wholesome, and I think you can still be wholesome while they're navigating that physical intimacy. And then I also just having come home from this book tour and seeing teens come to my events, it is just the coolest thing to hear that they have spent years with these characters, kind of the same way that I have. Because, there was a 4-year gap between books 1 and 2. So hearing that teens, some of the cool things that I heard on tour were people who had inside jokes with their friends about certain parts of the book, or teens who their teachers recommended them the book. And now, there was a reader who came with their teacher, or their past teacher, to the event, which was really cool. Or even there were a handful of teen couples who were like, "Oh my gosh, I relate to Neil, I relate to Rowan," and that was just really amazing to see.
That's awesome. I'm so happy that you had that experience. I'm curious, what was the, since we started off talking about you being in Boston at Brookline Booksmith, do you remember an especially interesting question that you were asked at that stop?
Actually, yes. Someone, I think this is the first question from the audience, and it kind of stumped me for a bit. It was probably one of the better questions I've been asked at an event. Someone said, what is the best thing that a teen reader has ever said to you at an event? So very, very relevant to what we're talking about. And at first I was just being kind of snarky, and I joked, I love your book. Which, you know, a teen coming up and saying that to you is really exciting. And it was a bit of a joke, but the more I thought of it, I was like, actually, there is something real to that, and something kind of surreal as well, because I am just sitting in my office by myself writing for most of the day, and going out in the world and having teens come to a book event and say that they related to your characters and that this book means something to them. And, you know, they're passing you their book that's full of annotations and, you know, highlighters and sticky notes. That is just incredible to see that your book is reaching the person that you wrote it for. Just coming from, sitting alone in your office to getting that, that reaction out in the world is like absolutely amazing. Like, there are no words for it.
Well, Rachel, I'm so happy that you had that interaction. One of the things, I've made a living doing educational magic shows for 35 years, and I get that reaction when I do a trick or say a joke. You know, that reaction from the audience is immediate, and I'm oftentimes curious about folks who are working on a book for years, and it comes out maybe a year after you've written it, and then you don't get that reaction until so much time has passed.
I know, it's really funny because sometimes I feel like I need to reread my book before I start doing events for it, because as an author, you're typically 1 or 2 books ahead mentally and just your current workload of whatever book is coming out. So yeah, it is. Sometimes when I do events and someone asks me about a book from a couple years ago, I really have to think, be like, wait, what was the specific? I mean, obviously I'm not forgetting what happened in the book, but I haven't regularly talked about it for a while, so it takes a moment.
Yeah. I remember, I'm not going to mention the name of the author, but I did have an author on, and I quoted a line from the book that I found especially powerful, and she said, I forgot I wrote that.
That's the best feeling. Or when someone picks up on a theme that you didn't intend, and you're like, oh, was I actually really smart this whole time?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, I think a lot of people associate YA romance as something young women are reading, but are you finding that there's an audience, that there are guys that are loving these books too?
I think so, yeah. You know, they may not be as vocal on social media or as active, but there were plenty of people of all genders. I definitely think it skews more toward girls and women, but I don't think that they have any kind of like, barrier to entry.
Excellent. Well, we should tell everybody where they can go to find out more about past, present, and future, and find out more about you.
Yeah, so on social media, I'm just on Instagram at RLYNN_Solomon, and my website, RachelSolomonBooks.com.
We've had a great time speaking to the author of Past, Present, and Future. Great YA title from our guest, Rachel Lynn Solomon. Hey, Rachel, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Jed.
This episode is brought to you by Ken, by Carolyn Nunez Vasquez. What do bears, foxes, eagles, deers, coyotes, rabbits, and nature have in common? They teach humans important lessons, and when we learn to pay attention to nature, we learn much about living in harmony. This is a wonderful book that you absolutely want to add to your family library. Ken, by Carolyn Nunez Vasquez. Join us right now from the beautiful state of Connecticut. Our guest is here today to celebrate her wonderful children's book. It's called Here With You. Here with us is the author, Kelly Kaminskas. Hey, Kelly, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Delighted to have you here today. Tell us all about Here With You.
Here With You is a children's book about the journey of grief and the love that stays behind even though we have lost a loved one.
You know, this is a really timely interview because somebody I care about very much, who is a college student, one of her friends passed very unexpectedly, and she's having a tough time as she should. So tell us a little bit about who are we going to meet in this story.
So my character is based off of my son. He had lost his father when he was a baby, and we didn't have many resources in books that I found worked for him. So I wrote it, and it's based off of him. This is his little character. This is my author copy. I didn't get the other ones yet, but looks just like him. So
Awesome.
It just follows him around on like little activities and like journeys throughout his day of, having that person still with him.
Well, I'm certainly very sorry for your loss and for his loss. What did you? My kids lost my son lost his grandfather and his great grandmother when he was just a baby, and so I don't know if it affected him that much. We've certainly talked about those people, and both him and my daughter, who didn't meet either one of them, will be able to tell you stories that they've heard from us. How did you first cope yourself and help your son get through this time?
I think he was one at the time, and my mom actually passed away a year before that. So we were both grieving the loss of a parent, together. As he's gotten older, obviously, he has had a lot of questions, and, having to teach somebody about another person is kind of tricky. But, they just go based off of memories and, what you can tell them about them.
Yeah. What gave you the strength to get through this tough time?
I don't really know. I just had to do it. I was the only one who could. So I just kind of, took it head on, and, it was a lot of growing pains together, but we figured it out.
But you kind of say that like, well, I kind of got to do it, and everybody who goes through a loss, they just kind of have to do it. But some folks do it better than others, and some folks don't do it at all.
Right.
Was there some kind of support that you were able to lean on that you found especially helpful?
I mean, we're in therapy together, my son and I, and that was been super helpful to learn how to talk about emotions and not, hold everything in, and different emotion words that we could use, depending on the mood we're in. So that's been super helpful, and I just have a great group of people around me and family that really, helped out when I was not be able to do it.
Yeah. Did you always aspire to be a children's author?
I always wanted to be a writer. Since I was a little girl, I did go to school and get my degree, Bachelor of Arts, with a focus in creative writing and English lit. Children's books weren't always my, path, but it kind of just happened that way. I wrote the book one night laying in bed with, him when he was a baby in my notes section in my phone, and it just kind of happened. So.
And now, and as you're reading, I'm trying to imagine going from, I wrote this story for my kid and I'm going to tell it to my kid. And it's like, this is pretty good. I could share this with the world.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Yes.
Okay. Tell me a little bit more about you, because people are going to be intrigued about your book, but they're going to want to know about you and who is this author, and why should I be interested in her?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is I feel like there's a lot of parents who have lost a partner, or even, there's a grandparent who has passed away, and there's not a lot of, there's really not a lot of resources for children, like books, when it comes to grief. And I think people are a little scared to touch the topic sometimes because it is so heavy. But I feel like there's an appropriate way to go about speaking about it with your child, depending on their age, just to make sure that as they get older, they're not going to struggle with their emotions. And, grief is messy. It's not linear. It's, it's tough, but I think that open dialogue about the topic of grief and death is really important with kids. And you'd be surprised how many children have lost a parent. So.
Obviously this would be a book that, and most people would imagine like, oh, this is great. There's a neighbor down the street in fact, there's a neighbor down the street who lost their mom. And so this would be a great book for them. But I'm imagining that there's a lot of value for a family that hasn't lost a loved one to bring this book into their home, to start having conversations, not only so they can support their classmates who might suffer a loss, but also, just to be prepared to understand that sad things happen in our lives.
Yes, exactly. I think the classmate thing is a really good point. When my son started kindergarten, everyone was going around like, oh, your dad. And he was like, well, I don't have a dad. And they were like, well, everybody has a dad. And he was like, well, mine died. And they didn't understand. You know what I mean? So I think it's so important for people to be mindful of, everyone's family is different, but something like this, it could be talked about, like you said, potentially, even if they haven't suffered a loss yet.
Yeah. We actually received a fair amount of criticism. My kids now are 28 and 30. And so certainly when I was a kid 100 years ago, no one talked about death. And, I didn't go to my first funeral until it was my grandfather and I was 16. Mm-hmm. 28, 30 years ago when we were bringing our kids to funerals, a lot of people like, shouldn't be doing that. It's too sad. And, it's so inappropriate to have this kid here at the funeral.
Right.
But I think it was a really healthy thing because we've been having conversations, with our kids, about life, about all aspects of life, from a very, very early age. And, they seem to be able to handle things a lot better than some of their peers.
Yeah, exactly. I just think it's so important to, I'm not saying go to a wake for fun, you know what I mean? But it's just really important. I mean, it's part of life, unfortunately. And sometimes we lose people way before we think we're going to, so preparation, you're never fully prepared to lose somebody, especially a parent. But I think preparing yourself as much as you can and educating your children about it definitely helps them in the long run.
Do you think helping your kids understand that life is, talking about death and loss and grief can help them better appreciate how precious life is and how we should make sure that we tell the people in our lives that we love them?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I feel like when you lose someone, like a parent or a spouse or even a grandparent, if you're close with them, it changes your world. You really do see things differently. So I think it makes you value so much more. Yeah.
Hey, Kelly, please tell everybody where they can go to find out more about Here With You and find out more about you.
Sure. My website is just my name. It's kellykaminskas.com, and I'm on Instagram at kelly.kaminskas.
We've had a really, really informative time speaking to the author of Here With You. Our guest has been Kelly Kaminskas. Hey, Kelly, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Reading with Your Kids and will join us for the next exciting episode of the show. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we want to start by thanking our guests, Rachel Lynn Solomon, Ell Gonzalez Rose, and Kelly Kaminskas. I want to thank my amazing team, Fatima Khan, Chris Doherty, Rory Grady, Judy Hu, Stella Charest, Hannah Bosange, Alyssa Montiero, Julia Lipman, Devin Hill. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place. And you do that every time you read with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next episode of Reading with Your Kids.